Hi, I'm Donna Walcavage. I'm a landscape architect and principal at Stantec. More importantly, for today, I am co-chair of the AIA Design for Risk and Reconstruction Committee and a member of the New York Committee of the Regional Plan Association. So I'm doubly pleased to welcome you all here today. I'm going to introduce Rob Freudenberg, who is the Vice President for Energy and Environment at the Regional Plan Association. And when RPA worked through these issues to be incorporated into the 4th Regional Plan, I had the pleasure of working with Rob when he led the resilience planning as part of his purview. So Rob will introduce today's program.
Thank you, Donna. Good morning, everyone. So thank you, Donna. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with you, AIA New York, and the Design for Risk and Reconstruction Committee here at the Center for Architecture. Thanks to you all for being here, and for those of you who might be tuning in. I know time is precious, and so we're pleased that you're spending some of your time with us here today. So the topic of today's panel is, can New York City learn to live with water? This is a question we don't ask lightly. Some are already living with water, and with increasing frequency, and sometimes with tragic consequences. But steps are being taken at all levels, city, state, and federal, to address flooding here in New York City. But the truth is, no matter what projects are completed, what communities are adapted, what infrastructure is upgraded, we still will face flooding, and so we must learn to live with water in ways that are manageable. So here to talk about this topic and help unpack it is a truly impressive panel. Their bios are on the website, so I'll just briefly introduce them. We have, and I guess as I call your name, you can come on up to the circle. David Erdman, who's the director for the Center for Climate Adaptation at Pratt Institute School of Architecture. Lorianne Farrell is the brand new Deputy Commissioner for Coastal Resilience with the New York City DEP Bureau of Coastal Resilience. Doug McPherson is the Interim Manager at Real Edgemere. And Cliff Jones is the Chief Planning Division, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the New York District. And moderating them in a conversation, we are pleased to have with us Elisaveta M. Brandon, who's a design writer. Please welcome the panel.
Yes, that's a yes. Can everyone hear me? That's a yes. Okay. Hello. Happy Friday. Okay, well, Rob has done the introductions for me. I'm going to jump in with a question that I would love each of you to answer. We have very different backgrounds here, so I'm thinking you'll have interesting and different answers. The question is, okay, what is your own definition of living with water? What does that mean to each of you? Whoever wants to start. I won't put anyone on the spot.
I will start. Good morning, everyone. When I think about living with water, I think about embracing the beauty and understanding the power of nature and water in itself. Thinking about not water as a threat, but water as a resource, and reframing the picture so that we begin to design our structures and the way we live to be in harmony with water as opposed to trying to fight it. But also understanding, when I talked about the power, understanding that there are threats that come along with that power, and we need to be really realistic about the challenges that water brings to us, and design in a way that we can bounce back if we are inundated with floodwaters, that we can clean up quickly and bounce back quickly. So it's really about a balance, I think.
Thank you. I have more questions for you, but I think it would make sense for all of you to jump in first, if you would.
I think a lot of what Lorianne shared resonated with me. So I'm new to working along the coast. Since December, I've been managing a community land trust in the Edgemere section of the Rockaways. So I had to learn a lot from the residents and the people that I work with in that capacity about how they live with water. And for me, it's been a lot of educating myself. Before I started the job, I didn't know what a king tide was. I didn't know like how high tide like fluctuated over the course of the month with the phases of the moon. Now I have a watch that tells me that. So I'll be informed when I'm talking to people and learning things about NAV D88, about what it means to be working in an environment with a very high water table, very low elevation, like how those two combine to create challenges to constrain some of your options for adaptation. So for me, it's been a lot of learning, and I'm curious what everyone else has to say.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what's been shared and maybe add a couple of additional thoughts. I mean, we all live with water currently. It's in your house. You have pipes everywhere. It's living right next to you. And I think the notion that flood management and stormwater management are the only two entry points into the discussion around water is something that will see its limits and yields probably in the next 20 to 25 years. So how we flip that into resource management will put pressure on how we literally live with it in buildings and as a good neighbor or a co-inhabitant or resident with us. It is likely to become less X and Y and more Z. And I think there's a lot of interesting questions around how we begin to think about that in the design context, in the context of nature-based systems, and certainly in the context of New York City, where you just don't have a lot of X and Y. We will have to think about other dimensions to engage it.
I guess that leaves me. All right, good morning, everybody. Living with water, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I couldn't have said it any better than colleagues here. I will say first, like everything else, it starts with understanding. So understanding what it is, the power of water, the risks that happen with water, but what it brings to us. And within the Corps, we have 3 basic missions that all include water. It's all about water resources, but it's, I mean, the navigation mission, it's the environmental restoration mission, and it's the flood risk and coastal storm risk reduction mission. All of them involve that question of how do we live with that, understanding the risks that are out there, but also understanding the benefits that come from that. How do we sustain our societies and sustain the environment, understanding what water does, and not just for now, but in 50, 100 years from now, what does that mean? What is our future going to look like? What are we going to hand over to our kids and our grandkids? Understanding, again, what we tend to agree on is our future and the risks therein. There's a lot of opportunities, and I think that's what we're here to discuss, some of which, what are we proposing for the future, or what are the ideas out there? And the academic community is definitely a part of everything that we do, helping us to learn what it is to live with water.
Thank you, everyone. So there's an interesting debate that everyone takes part of, usually in this topic, and it's this idea of hard versus soft infrastructure. And I wonder, Cliff, if you can start with this question, because the Army Corps is known for sort of these hard barriers that keep water out. How do you think about the potential of letting water in? What does that mean for the Army Corps? Maybe you can talk about, in fact, I will let you answer without, I'll stop here.
No, it's a good topic, and I think we have been, for a large part, dealing with more hard structures to deal with the risks of those flood damages that we've seen. And we, as the Corps of Engineers, have evolved over time in what we call those things. We've been looking at the coast and have gone from erosion control, then realized we don't really control erosion, going to flood damage reduction. Well, we're not really reducing the damages to where we are now, reducing the risks. So when we talk about storm risk reduction, when we talk about coastal storm risk reduction, that's really what we're talking about, getting in there. And with that evolution, we've gone from some of those harder structures, walls, and a lot within here, within New York and New Jersey, when we talk about hardened structures, we've been doing a lot of structural, but softer structural within the coast, whether we're putting beach berms, planting them to provide that risk reduction. But there's also a complement that goes with that that we've seen in areas like the Rockaways, where when we add groins to those areas, it provides a means for that sediment to capture in certain areas. But understanding what we can do on the shorefront and within the back settings of those shores, there still is an opportunity to understand how do we live with the consequences that still might be out there, those risks. And now we are delving more and more into non-structural solutions. And it's a wide array of alternatives just to say that topic, but it definitely includes things like buying out, elevating, doing things to reconstruct the floodplain, basically, to take a look at what's in harm's way and how do we move out of harm's way. So there's a lot of things involved in that. And we, within the Corps, we're trying to learn from a lot of things that others have already done. How do we get into that mindset, and how do we get into those non-structural? Because there's a lot involved in that when we talk about dealing with specific homeowners. And that's a process that we're still grappling with and trying to deal with. But there's a lot, and I'll say with some of the studies just within our area, we would look at the New Jersey Back Bay study, the Nassau County Back Bay study, and the New York, New Jersey HAT study, all have included or expecting to include a large part of non-structural solutions in the array of the plans that move forward.
Thank you. I will definitely come back to the HAT study, but I wanted to, David, I wanted to ask you, Cliff, you mentioned this idea of elevation versus buyouts, and I know we spoke about this earlier this week, and I feel like this is partly a design matter or problem. What are you seeing, or what I know that you've worked kind of across the world. How do people feel about this idea of buyouts versus elevation, and is there an answer? Does the answer depend on where you are, who the people are, what the neighborhood is like, what the threats are like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a silver bullet, and it will take quite a bit of work for everybody to get into it and explore this. But, you know, I think part of it starts with pitting soft systems against hard. If you see them as different value systems, or you don't see them as a both-and scenario, you are kind of already kicking yourself out of an opportunity in a high-stress real estate urban situation that just will never get to capacity if you only understand nature-based systems as operating in rights of way and public land. Triple Ps, more complex sectional strategies that allow you to live right on top of things, I think is a future area of really important study. You see subjects like this being examined in Singapore around energy, where you see landscapes going very vertically. There's a lot of policy and economic incentive to do and study that kind of work, and it anticipates failures in its piloting. It does not assume that it's going to solve it, but some of it will work, some of it won't work. So I think finding that low-hanging fruit in New York City, maybe in some of the archipelago islands like Governor's Island, you see similar pilots around Waste and Roosevelt Island, but there could be some pieces of the HAT study that could be broken off to test some of these things that could be interesting and similar here. You know, understanding how a nature-based system can be something we live with that's inside of a hardened structure, maybe not just on the perimeter. I think those are really challenging but interesting design questions that we could begin, you know, contributing to that discussion on. But that diminishes the binary oppositional valuation that we often tend to hear about. Even the term non-structural, while I appreciate all of the new efforts that the Corps is making to include that element into its study, suggests that somehow the soft system isn't a fundamental part of the value and the structure of the future of that ecosystem. And so it's fantastic. I was just on a panel in Miami. There's great work in both cities you all are doing, but the perception of that suggests that it's, in my opinion, suggests that it's decorative almost, as opposed to it being integral to the issue. And so that compresses those things together, and in tight, high pressure areas like New York and Singapore, where people are unlikely to retreat in some of the more hardened areas, we may have different options out in Edgemere and out in the Back Bay. But there has to be a range of how hard and soft could mix. I think that opens up a lot of interesting design questions.
Could I hop in on this one? So I feel like it's difficult to engage in the question of like buyouts versus elevation in abstract for me, because I feel like in different contexts there are practical considerations that reveal different pros and cons for the respective options. So an example in Edgemere is that a lot of the housing that does exist in the community, specifically on the bay side of Beach Channel Drive, which is sort of the big dividing line in the community, was built under Bloomberg era affordable housing programs, where many of the homes were either in attached rows or semi-attached. And so when Sandy happened, and when homeowners were given the option to elevate their homes, there was a practical issue. Like, if you were semi-attached and you wanted to elevate and your neighbor didn't, you didn't get elevated. So in that situation, like some of the design, that was a great idea back in 2005 and people liked living in those homes, ended up being a constraint on people's options when, it came time to do adaptation. And then on the buyouts point, I've been really stuck in for the past couple of weeks in Jake Biddle's book, Great Displacement. Strongly recommend if you hadn't had a chance to pick it up. But he talks about buyouts in several different communities, either by big insurance payouts or from the government. And typically a good outcome is you have enough money to cover your mortgage and enough left over to, get a down payment on another home, hopefully in a community that's close to the one that you're leaving. But if that's not a possibility because of how tight the real estate market is in New York City and you have to go to farther flung places, then people may think differently about that as an option, and may want to dig in a little bit more. So it's tricky, right? I feel like the situation may be different in a rural North Carolina community versus New York City versus Northern California versus you name it.
Well, while you have the mic, actually, could you talk a little bit about the Community Land Trust and how that plays a role in Edgemere?
Sure, yeah. So the organization that I run, the Real Edgemere Community Land Trust, well, first of all, community land trusts, what are they? They're basically nonprofit organizations that are responsible for acquiring and stewarding land for the long term for two uses, primarily. One is permanently affordable housing. Most, if not all, land trusts do that. And a second is, a variety of different other uses that have specific community utilities. So it might be retail spaces where neighborhood-based entrepreneurs are able to do business, or publicly accessible open spaces, et cetera. And we, as a land trust, came out of post-Sandy recovery efforts where one of the city's intervention in Edgemere post-Sandy was to give a neighborhood organization control over scattered lots throughout the community, about 119 in total, to do a mix of permanently affordable housing and open spaces that would have some sort of resilience or stormwater management utility. So what we're seeing our job as in the next few years is to address sort of two very exigent issues. One is that Edgemere is one of, if not the most vulnerable communities to the threat of climate change in the Rockaways. Edgemere residents have the highest flood insurance premiums under the FEMA program. They have the highest deductibles when things go wrong. They're only 5% of the total flood insurance policies on the peninsula, but we've been 15% of the claims post-Sandy and 20% of the total payouts. And that's illustrative, like a downstream illustration of some upstream issues. One of them is the housing elevation challenge that I mentioned to you, but others are, the fact that some of the recommended, hard and soft infrastructure interventions that have been studied and have been recommended post-Sandy are still in the design phase, haven't yet been implemented yet, and so we're seeing the downstream effects in the neighborhood's lived experience and the economic issues. Another issue is that, as I mentioned, a lot of homes were built in like the mid 2000s under a Bloomberg era affordable housing program. Many of those homes' affordability restrictions will expire in the next 3 to 5 years. And so those homeowners will then be free to sell their homes on the market, and we may see like a turnover demographically in the neighborhood as predominantly black and brown homeownership base, decide to go to Florida or decide to do whatever. And so there's a little bit of anxiety that the decontrol and affordability restrictions will exacerbate some of the trends that we've already seen since Sandy in the gentrification of the Eastern Rockaways, including Edgemere. So we're hopeful that some of the things that we can do in terms of programming of open spaces with stormwater management utility and bringing new, like, resilient, affordable housing to the community that has permanent affordability restrictions instead of temporary ones can address that mix of our climate change issues and also our gentrification issues.
Thank you. I want to zoom out as much as we can, and Lorian, this one's for you. How does living with water fit into your vision as part of the Bureau of Coastal Resilience?
Well, so the Bureau of Coastal Resilience is 6 months old now, the city, and our mandate is to address sea level rise, tidal flooding, and coastal storm surge. I was thinking when we were talking about hard versus soft infrastructure and the really great points you're making, David, about how do we reframe, how we integrate nature-based solutions into actually different systems that we haven't typically thought about. We always thought about them around the edge. Now bringing them interior into buildings, I think, is fascinating. But it made me think that my role, my mandate, those three types of flooding are only some of the types of flooding, and so in order to actually truly think about a living with water scenario where you can fully explore hard and soft treatments, green or gray treatments, you need to think about all of the different types of flooding together. And so it's really important for our bureau then to be super collaborative with the other bureaus and agencies across the city that are also dealing with flood risk management. So fortunately for me, our bureau is within the Department of Environmental Protection, and we have our green infrastructure team there, we have the stormwater management team there, the Bureau of Water and Sewer Operations, and we also house the wastewater treatment teams. So it's now become easier to talk about one water as opposed to I have my thing, you have your thing, and sometimes those things are now competing. So traditionally I would say for coastal storm surge, in a city like New York, where we don't have a lot of space to build miles of wetlands, we would automatically be defaulting to hard infrastructure in many, many cases, and as much as that is not very welcome to hear, right? But when we actually do the math and we say, okay, what can we actually do here, it becomes hard infrastructure. But when you invite the storm water conversation in, and you think about the temporal scales that we can be planning over, you can actually make some different types of choices. And when you think about housing in that equation as well, and start to talk to people about what they want to see and offer them financial support to make different choices, perhaps you're not just looking at hard, but you're looking at a full system that is fluid, pardon the pun, but it's flexible, it thinks about different timescales. And the reality is also the fiscal restraints that we have in being able to build a lot of the solutions. We can start to phase those in too and have different tiers of treatments for the water. So that's the one piece of it. And the second piece is that we understand that we are not here to fight Mother Nature, right? We know that as engineers, we have factors of failure, that we're never going to be able to keep all the water out. We're never going to be able to fully predict what the next storm will be. We know it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be another Sandy. It's going to be something different. So in addition to thinking about how do we convey and shape and control water, we have to realize that we won't always be able to keep it out. What do people need to be aware of so that they can make their own informed choices for how they want to live with water? How do we be really transparent and open with the data and build other systems as well, policy systems, financial packages, building social cohesion so that people can protect each other in the event of a storm. All of these are part of living with water.
Yeah. What are your, how do you prioritize all of that? Like, do you have a set of short-term and then long-term goals, and then what does that timeline look like? Are we talking 10 years from now? 2 years from now?
You sound like my chief operating officer.
Sorry.
She got to you. I'm working on that. I'm not 100% sure. One of the things that falls into place for us in terms of the timing and prioritization is the amount of time it takes to build large-scale infrastructure. So I know we're going to talk about HATS, but HATS has a very specific timeline. So we know we have a 2-year, 4-year, 8-year, 10-year window, and each of those windows bring different planning elements. So while we're doing that, we can also start working on some of the other faster-moving pieces of the puzzle. Although I will have to say, some of those policy changes and legislative changes are not any faster than building large-scale infrastructure. So there is a need to also think about, I would say for me, prioritizing right now, I'm almost pinned down on long-term strategy planning and thinking about 2024 hurricane season. And what do we need to do with our emergency management teams to make sure we're ready for this? And then there are pieces of infrastructure being built today along the east side of Manhattan that we're going to be starting to take over some of the assets that have been in planning for a decade, and now we're getting ready to start to think about operating those big floodgates along the east side of Manhattan. So we're also having to prioritize getting ready to operate as early as 2026, 2027. So some of those assets are coming online in this summer, but we're not operating them yet because we have to build the whole system. But now prioritizing getting the training in place, getting the operations and maintenance planning in place, getting the crews in place. And so right now my priorities are building up the bureau, getting the staff, understanding how we're going to maintain and operate the assets coming online, and then thinking about HATS and how do we make sure the city is got everything lined up that we need to have to be able to participate fully in HATS, to continue to participate in a way that we get to the end of that process with solutions that work for everyone.
I think it's time we introduce HATS in case someone doesn't know. Cliff, that one's for you. What is HATS? What is HATS?
All right. Usually I ask the question in a different way, but I'm going to ask, is anybody not aware of what HATS is? Oh, we got a few out there. All right. So I'm sure Ninja HATS is probably very, very far removed. So New York and New Jersey harbor and tributary study. It's what we've been faced with. So after Hurricane Sandy, we were challenged with 9 different areas all along the East Coast. How do we address these major metropolitan areas in a way that hasn't been addressed before? There was Hurricane Sandy provided, the legislation from Hurricane Sandy provided funding to get a lot of the projects that were either underway or within study to get those completed and get those finished. We did an extremely I say successful job in getting that pipeline done. There are a few that still need to be done, like the Rockaways, trying to finish. And I'll just say, just to do this within here, words are so important, and it's interesting to see. And I definitely agree how the perception of words people hear non-structural and it could mean a whole different thing. I was in Rockaway, the discussion with folks out there, and come to the realization that they don't like the term Back Bay. Bayside, it's like, since when are we Back Bay people? Like, okay, I had to educate my commander, the whole district, as to what that meant. But it is sensitive. But within New York, New Jersey hats, we were embarked on this study to look at the comprehensive nature of understanding what it means to have that storm surge within the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area. The damages that we saw from Hurricane Sandy, what does that mean looking at it now and then looking at it 50 years out from now? And typically our planning horizon is 50 years, but there was an understanding that we need to go out further. We need to understand for 100 years, what is that going to look like? What are the impacts going to be? And if we do design something or we do propose something, how can we have that adaptable to recognize the threats that would be within that 100-year horizon? So that's the challenge that we've basically been facing. But that challenge really does underscore and understand all of the other threats that are out there. So we try to build in what's going on based on Hurricane Sandy, based on the storm surge coming in. And for the large part, if we can answer that question, then we can look at everything else that goes within that. So if the major components become addressing that storm surge, then everything else is also considered in there. So we looked at a variety of alternatives within the HAT study. And out of those alternatives, which ranged from a wide storm surge barrier connecting Brooklyn to Sandy Hook, to lesser impacted areas and solutions to more land-based solutions. And within all of those solutions, and I'll kind of jump to the chase, we landed on this 3B alternative, which has storm surge barriers within Jamaica Bay, within the Arthur Kill, KVK, some smaller gates within Flushing, within Jamaica Bay, Gerritsen Creek, and some elevations in some areas, increasing promenades, looking at walls in certain areas. And again, if we can kind of come to that conclusion that that's the best solution that meets what we call our NED, our National Economic Development plans, that provides the most benefit from a cost perspective, then we can adjust that to say that's the framework to base everything on. Now let's see how we integrate non-structural solutions, nature-based solutions, addressing also, if we have those barriers in place, what is that going to look like for areas that wouldn't need the barriers closed? So for more sunny day flooding, for possibly more fluvial flooding, what is that going to mean to increase areas like we're struggling now with areas in the Rockaways like Edgemere? How do we impact areas that are subject to those more frequent flooding events? Not the big Hurricane Sandys, but folks are flooded on a daily basis, and sometimes, whether it's king floods or we just had the pink moon this week, right? So areas that are subjected to those astronomical high tides. So looking at the whole complex system, but landing on that 3B to be the framework to move on. And now we're in a position to look at that alternative being our framework. Now how do we move on? We put out a draft report, I want to say last year, but it was probably 2 years ago now, January of 2022. But based on that, we got back in excess of 3,000 comments. Now we're working on, well, what do we do with that? How do we move on from all of those comments that we got back? And the agency is really pushing us, understanding the framework of this and how we move on. There's still a timeline to get to completion what can we do to address some of the short-term issues? So when we talk about priorities, how can we prioritize doing something now, doing something earlier, what we're calling early actionable items or features? How can we get those in place where it's not as controversial, it might be simpler to do some of these elements? And there are a couple of things that are being floated around as alternatives, and we're working with the city and the states as to picking out those, if we want to say low-hanging fruits, to try and get to those while still understanding the whole comprehensive nature of what we call this HAT study. We're at a point now where we're trying to get alignment within our own headquarters and within the Assistant Secretary's office to make sure that we can accomplish all of these goals. It's going to cost us some additional money, it's going to cost us some additional time, but we feel that it's the right thing to do to move it forward in a way to address the comprehensive solution, but also to include some of these early actionable items. I think that is.
No, that's good. I just one more quick thing from you. What was the most common feedback that you got? Were there some common threads? Because 3,000 comments is a lot, and I'm sure there are some things that people were unhappy about, and some things they were happy about.
So I'll go to the happies first. The Rockaway area, the Jamaica Bay area, was overwhelmingly pleased with what we had, and they're looking forward to having that barrier discussion on the Rockaway, something within the framework of where Robert Moses Causeway is, something connecting Marine Park to Breezy Point. There is a real desire there to reduce the risk of the floods that come in from the major events. And to have those other features for the more frequent events. So the challenge there is also, though, that what we do, because everything that we do with a storm surge barrier needs to make sure that we're building up the same high ground to make sure that there is no induced flooding. Now, in an area like Breezy Point, that does become a challenge. And we're working to see what we can do in that area to make sure that anything that we propose is not going to make any area increased in risk. So there are some challenges there. For the large part, what we've heard is that 3B is a good framework to work on based on all of the other options that are out there.
3B is in the middle. We should note that, right? It's literally in the middle of the spectrum.
Right. Now, the challenges do become, are you sufficiently addressing the environmental justice communities? We've heard from a few that, hey, you left me out. Can we look at those? And that's a valid comment, because there are, when we talk about environmental justice, it's not necessarily doing more in specific communities, it's addressing the needs of the communities. Sometimes we hear loudest from those that have the most political clout, if you will, and the folks that are impacted don't have the same voice. So we have to give them a certain voice and come out more in public forums like this, and we have been doing some of that, specifically in the Rockaways, to try and make sure that we're out there addressing those concerns. And that, to me, is the biggest challenge with our environmental justice initiatives, in just making sure that we are doing the due diligence to go out there to communities and be that voice to them. And we've created, within the HATS team, we've created an Environmental Justice Coordination Committee. I think I got that right. And that committee is really the group that's kind of going to steer us in the way and advocate for these are the groups that you need to go to, and or we will be that sounding voice as we move forward. So I think that's a great that was a great comment, and it's a great solution that we've built in. The other comments, I guess framework. Okay, you're building a wall that's going to separate the water from our view, and it is a valid comment. And this is where we have to understand. Okay, people want to live with water. What part of the water do you want to live with? You want to live with it in your basement? That's fine. We can understand that and move on. Or do you want to have some form of protection? And that protection, even though we're saying at a point that there's a wall in place, once we get the concept done, there is a part of it that we can modify and look at the design. How can we still accomplish the same goals, maybe without as much aesthetics being taken away? So once we get these concepts, that's a big part. And to the non-structural as well, we're trying to build the whole comprehensive solution set so that once something is authorized, we have all of these tools in our toolkit that we can use. Not necessarily that all will be implemented, because there are challenges with each one of them. I might have a homeowner that says, no way you're stepping on my property to do anything. All right, but we have that still in our authorized toolkit to say, I can do this if all of the other stars align, then people are willing to take those risks in as well.
Thank you. The timeline for HATS or Alternative B is humongous, right? We're talking, I don't even know that we have a realistic number, but 10 years plus, right? Regardless, it's long, and people find it really hard to grok such timelines, especially people who are affected by floods and storms every year, several times a year. So I'm curious, what are some very practical solutions that are implementable literally in a matter of months, ideally? I mean, I'm thinking of something as simple and low-tech as sandbags, right? They come out every time the city floods, then they go back in, and then they come back out. Is there anything better from an urban planning perspective, a design perspective, something? I'm even thinking of tactical urbanism. I don't know if those are good solutions or if it's just a Band-Aid. David, Douglas, maybe one of you can chime in.
So when I started working in the Rockaways, like back in December, I thought I'd be like very in the weeds of the HAT study, and it really has not been the way that things have played out, because of the nature of the flood risks that the community experiences are less so, large Sandy style storm surge events, and more so like blue sky flooding, like the flooding that we had back during the King Tide event back in January, Winter Storm Elliott, like things like that are more sort of small and frequent, but with, more aggressive sea level rise projections into later decades of this century. We may expect with no interventions, twice daily flooding, if we see 30 inches plus within communities like Edgemere. So we've been thinking a lot more about like what can be done along the coastline in order to strengthen it, in order to prevent tidal flooding events such as that. I'm not sure if we can go all the way on the informality scale towards, tactical urbanism and my friends and I just, putting a bunch of sandbags at the water's edge. But the good news that we have heard is that the Army Corps is doing a lot of work on the coastal storm risk management project in Edgemere and some of the neighboring neighborhoods. The work is funded, which is great, so that they don't need another congressional appropriation in order to build the berms and or the seawalls and or the bulkheads, et cetera, et cetera. The bit that's I think concerning for me and for other members of the Edgemere community is that you could do all that, but then the neighborhood may be cut off from the water. And that would be, there'd be something lost in there as well, given that we're in a waterfront community. Many people are there because they want to be close to it. And so you wouldn't want to see protective infrastructure that wholly builds a wall, between the community and the waterfront. And so, folks may say, okay, well, if you build a berm on the bay, then can't you go to the beach, right? And in Edgemere, the answer is like kind of no. Many folks may not know this, but the beach on the ocean side of Edgemere is protected land for the Piper plover species of endangered birds, and so residents from this black and brown community cannot walk to their beach and like go there because of the conservation utility of this particular part of the Rockaways. So we wouldn't want that like isolation to be rendered complete by some of the interventions being talked about on the Bayside. And this is where, I'm really excited that, Clifford and Lorianne are sitting next to each other, because while the Army Corps can do a lot of hard infrastructure work in berms and so on, if there are quote unquote betterments, if there are amenities that would have a community utility, that could be boat launches or places for people to fish or places for people to have access to the water, that's something that the Army Corps would look to its city and its state partners to help fund. So they wouldn't do it on their own with federal money. There'd need to be a little bit of a partnership. And so over the course of the next couple of years, as the Army Corps is going through their design process for the coastal storm risk management infrastructure, we're really hoping that there can be a robust conversation among city, state, federal partners to make sure that priorities for community access to the water are foregrounded as we're planning for some of the resiliency infrastructure that we need. So I know I didn't answer the question,
But I suspect there is no.
There are people in the community who wanted me to say what I said.
I mean, I think one of the entry points is possibly around more daily and regular inundation. And I think what Lorianne was sharing, like if you look at the IPCC 6th report, they ranked all of the continents based on threats. They also break down how much adaptation we can do against economic, political, and social vectors that can resist one another. And they included, for the first time, small islands in that study. And of all the continents, which saw 2 to 3 threats per continent, islands saw 5 of 6, which means we are basically in the red here. Whether you're in Manhattan or Edgemere, you're going to get it from every direction. So the idea that storm surge and the kind of coastal philosophy that we've seen around defense is one that's going to be coupled with more regular vertical atmospheric storms, and those areas that get both are going to get hammered by that. So I think that we see that on a more soft and regular basis, and thinking about how systems could be integrated to handle those different vectors would be an interesting place to start. And we sketched out some ideas in our pre-meeting here, but certainly, we can think about walls for heavier storms, but every building could be adapted to have wall-like components in it. They could also be adapted to be more absorbent and hold and store water to become part of the watershed and mitigate what's being released out in a kind of time release scenario. Both of those could have communal and habitat benefits, but they would require an understanding of where we could pilot those rapidly. They're not sandbag solutions, so they're not tomorrow, but they could be like next year. We could get them into place by 2026 when the city's learning how to operationalize heavier things, and start by 2027 or 28 looking at how to more deal with community operationalization or blended models that aren't maybe strictly municipal but involve neighborhoods and community engagement to kind of own and operate those. Those are, I think, some of the areas that I think could be tested. And if we don't start testing them now, we will never get that whole portfolio of capacity online. It is maybe not the big threat, but it is another growing combination of threats that deals more with the day-to-day that I think is going to have an escalatory importance in our geopolitical set of circumstances in the next decade or two. And so, I think that's an area where we could maybe make some progress, work with communities, work with educational institutions, and the Corps, because I would see this as a complementary form of wall making that we would need to partner with the Corps on. How do you live on that? How do we, and obviously with the city, there's a lot of really important questions for public health and public safety that go with that. But nonetheless, maybe it's vector that we could nudge a little bit and accelerate.
Lauren, you grabbed your mic. Did you want to add something?
Yes, I feel like we need to start talking about choices and be really upfront and honest with ourselves about the real challenges that we're facing. And when we put all of those challenges together in one bucket, it can be completely overwhelming, which is I think why as government agencies we tend to pick off the pieces that we can chew, right? But we can't afford that anymore, especially in New York City. We know that a city is only as resilient as its most vulnerable population. And so I'm now revising my answer before about priorities. I think we should be prioritizing our most vulnerable populations and really diving in to understand how do we make sure that we have the long-term plans in place, but also how do we help these communities face these future threats and give back some of the choices. A lot of the reasons why we have vulnerable communities living in floodplains is because of choices that we made back in the day, why we have highways running through and cutting off communities. Like we all know about environmental justice reasons. How do we start to now make choices that walk back some of those unfair situations? How do we start to build wealth in our communities and like generational wealth? And it's more than just buyouts, right? We have to be thinking in a different way about how we support our vulnerable communities. And that includes what do we do between now and the next 10, 20 years when we have these great plans for managing water in place? We have this risk, this gap. And so we know that the city has an interim flood protection management program where they can go out and put up barriers and help protect certain areas. We need to continue to support that and expand it and think, try to be more innovative too in some of those solutions. That program was almost cut this year from funding. The funding challenges are real in the city. And so it's not just a matter of coming up with the idea and then going and doing it. There's all of these other things that have to happen. And until we actually talk honestly about the threats, we're not gonna pass through those barriers of implementation. Even our grand ideas have a long way to go before we can get through the barriers to implementation for funding, for public buy-in, for environmental protection. So it's just a matter of understanding, I think, that we have an opportunity now to shape the future of this region in a way that we can shape it in a way that we value and enjoy and protects everyone, or it will shape itself, right? And we'll all have to retreat because everything's washed away because that 9 foot of water coming at us from a Sandy isn't gonna discriminate, right? And so I just think I think we need a bit of a shake-up, a wake-up call. I think we talk a lot about plans and wish we could do this, wish we could do that, and we need to get urgent now. We need to get this sense of urgency at all levels of government. Every community member needs to be participating in these plans. I think that our professional circles, we have lots of conversations and we have great ideas, but we need to make the choice of yes. Let's move forward with these things now.
You made me think of something that I think is directly a part of what's being discussed here, that is a model that we've been keen to discuss at a number of levels, but you see it in the energy sector, and it's been piloted in Ithaca, New York, which is called community choice aggregation. We've been wanting to leverage and try to understand that and that's a microgrid solution. So you get more households to buy in to the energy transition. They choose to do that, and over time that builds resilience and better storage of electricity, possibly emergency power, those types of measures. What if we apply that to a blue microgrid, and you're talking about community choice aggregation that could be rapidly introduced? I think some of the points, Doug, that you bring up about duplexes and structures that aren't single family detached dwellings would be challenging in that scenario, because in Ithaca they have the benefit of most of that being single family detached dwellings. So in New York City it raises other issues, but if if we can find the capacity to make choices about funding some of those kinds of pilots that would bring the community in, they could be worthy opportunities. You know, that's one example I'm thinking of, Lori, and that kind of speaks to what you're saying about bringing community in. And because carbon is such a dominant conversation, the conversation not only around flood management, but water resource management, those blue grids could store and recycle and reuse. So they could get ahead of future stormwater bills, future potential gray water or blue water bills if they're, you know, understood in the right way and as a short-term / long-term solution.
Well, I think you make a really good point there too about the connectivity of these grids. So it you know, and the collective discussion that needs to happen. And stormwater rates are going up and up and up. So this is an opportunity to sort of combat that pressure on the individual's pocketbook. I mean, I'm Canadian, so I have this view of floodplain management that is different than the legislative environment here, because in Ontario, you're not allowed to build in the floodplain, right? And if you go to the Netherlands, the whole community understands water and flow, and it's collective. Here, some of the challenges we were talking about with individual homeowners not wanting to make choices for the collective is a challenge, and we need to start to change and think about systems as a whole, which is hard to do in this environment. In the United States, it's very, very hard. So how do we get individuals to start understanding the benefits to their own properties, but also to support a systems approach? If you're gonna, so I had this dream that if we're gonna deal with flooding from the coast and the storm sewers together, what we really need are overland flow routes, so that if the storm comes up and the rain comes down, there's enough swaths of land within the interiors to hold water for as much time as we can. In a city like New York, it's impossible to fathom because of the amount of land you'd need, you know. So what do we do in the meantime? How do we use these individual buildings, but not just think about them individually, but how do we connect them, get enough of the people to make that storage that we need. Yeah. Water's simple, right? Water flows downhill, water needs space, right? And what's not simple is how we use the land and don't accommodate the water. So anyway, that's back to my choices thing. We have choices to make. If we make choices that are going to really address the true issues, then we have a chance. Otherwise, we're constantly going to be fighting water, and some people are going to lose. Some people will be able to leave and go elsewhere. How do we make sure the people that don't have those choices, we support them?
Did you want to add something? Or?
Yeah, I just wanted to hop in. I think when you were describing in your answer a few minutes ago, there were a lot of like coulds and like possibilities. Like one of the things that I saw within the past couple of months that was really exciting was over the water in Hoboken. They have a program for zoning bonuses if you're able to locate a cistern and do on-site like stormwater management during rain events that you could then use as gray water for like watering, you know, plants on the grounds and stuff like that. And I've seen like zoning bonuses in New York for transit station, like, you know, entrances or for affordable housing, but it's really interesting to see, you know, bringing a stormwater management lens into like how you think through that element of land use planning. I don't know what the barriers to doing something similar in New York or where we would prioritize or pilot that, but I thought it was a really cool idea that's not too far away.
What are the barriers to doing that in New York?
To doing like a rain barrel program, or?
Yeah.
I don't think there are any barriers. I think it's just a matter of policy, and I believe it's been spoken about. I'm fairly new to the city, so I'm not sure what has and hasn't been done already. I will tell you, in where I bought my own house in Ontario, the Conservation Authority there actually made it a requirement of the developer to provide rain barrels for every house, which was cool. I was excited. I got my house. I got my rain barrel. Before the fences went up, the rain barrel blew away, and someone took it. And so I was very, very sad. But then what I noticed when the fences went up, once the enforcement officers couldn't, see into backyards anymore, everybody paved their backyards. And I don't know where those rain barrels went. because I didn't see, because I had an elevated kitchen, I could see out into my neighbors' backyards. I didn't see any rain barrels. So I'm here sad, mine's gone, and everybody else paved. And so it's not just about providing rain barrels. It's about education. It's about people understanding the infrastructure that supports us. And so we have a long way to go because unfortunately, even I studied water resources engineering, I didn't even really understand where the rivers were in my community until after I graduated. Like I had done 4 years of studying water before I looked around and went, oh shoot, that concrete line channel was a river, right? We whisk the water away, we don't think about it. As long as it's flushing properly out of our house, that's good. We need to start making people or helping people see what is happening with the systems and how their actions impact the systems that support us in terms of infrastructure. I think it's super exciting. I don't know why everybody else doesn't think that's exciting. And it shouldn't just be about enforcement there are other ways that you can, if you don't want to cut your lawn, there are other things you can do in your backyard besides paving it. So you should be able to meet everybody's needs, not force them into some sort of behavior. I think it's just people are not necessarily aware of different choices and the support that they need.
Do we know what happened with the barrel program in Ontario? Like,
In
generally
Ontario?
speaking?
Oh yeah, they still do that. There's a really solid range downspout disconnection program across the Greater Toronto region. I think we have that here too, but I don't know if it's as robust. Like I said, water is simple. Water needs space and it needs to flow, and it's best away from your homes and your structures. So anything we can do to reverse some of the choices, because there was a time when we thought it was a good idea to concrete line channels, right? Water, that was a good idea. It was the best engineering we knew at the time. There was a time when it was a good idea to put a downspout connected to the sanitary sewer. And so now we evolve, we learn about these systems and how our activities can be actually can degrade the greater systems. So I'm talking about hydraulic cycles, right? We want to protect those. So we know better now. We know about bioengineering. We don't have to harden everything. Sometimes there's a hybrid approach. I'm sorry, I totally lost sight of the question because I got excited.
It's just about the barrel program.
The barrel program, yeah, it's still in existence. It's happening everywhere, all around the world as we understand more about a balance of water and trying to get water back into the ground as opposed to running off, right? And because timing with water is important. So you could have a large volume of waterfall in rain. It may not cause flooding. It just depends on how fast it came, where it fell. And so if you can help rebalance the timing of how that water flows over land and gets into the ground, that's a big part of our solution as well. The rain barrels help with that.
So I'll just use that as an opportunity to give back to you. But I know we're working, and it's a huge concern. We've enabled people to pave everything over, so we've lost that ability in many places to let water go where it needs to go. And water will find a way to go somewhere else. So you paving yours, it's going to find somewhere else to go. But what we're working with New York City on is this cloudburst program, which is really, would you use the word exciting? And I think there is a lot of excitement in that because it does use that concept in allowing water to go where it can go without harming other things, building paved roads where they can allow water to flow in certain areas. So within that program, we're going to continue to work that and see how we can adapt that, gets to the kind of priorities, what can we do first while we're still studying other things. But we are looking at some of that to not compensate, but to complement what we're doing within the overall HAT strategy. Using that not necessarily in the form of making more recommendations, but using that in a way that we can use that in our report to say what else is being done to address that whole comprehensive nature of how we're addressing the storm risks in the whole New York, New Jersey area.
I mean, the 2022 Unified Stormwater Rule, I think, was a huge move for New York City. And I think there are collateral enabling mechanisms attached to that that maybe could be bolstered and ripened to be more accessible to other communities like Edgemere or otherwise. And I agree that the Cloudburst program is very exciting, and the study that's going on right now is interesting. However, the work that we're doing and that we're seeing in Southeast Asia and in Patagonia, it's questionable whether or not that gets you to capacity. At some point, you have to ask the question if you do steer water away, or if you need to live with it and suck it in and build it into your building. Like, should the building become more observed? Hold it in the building. And I think that, Singapore is the blue chip standard globally. They're 50% water independent. They've quadrupled the number of reservoirs. They are doing huge coastal defense projects. Their governance structure allows them to accelerate things in wildly spectacular and horrible ways that we don't practice in the States. But there are benchmarks there that are interesting, and they are hitting a ceiling because they aren't using buildings enough. And that's part of the discussion we're having with them there, is can you store it in the building, which is, triggers the buildings to becoming part of the watershed. The general practice and logic, for several hundred years here, and the tacit knowledge before that, is you always steer it away. And the economics of urban archipelagos like New York put tons of pressure on every square inch that doesn't really make that pencil. I mean, to hydrologists and engineers that we've spoken with, it's like, where's the release? So you have to have some other trigger.
So you're talking specifically about allowing water to flow through the building. So keep your first floor empty, or put things on the first floor that can withstand inundation of water for hours on end. Make sure that the building is designed in a way that the hydrostatic pressure of the water pushing against it from the inside and the out is going to be, you have to have a bit of an architectural component there as well for the structural stability. But then we learn to live with water, because when the water is flowing, we've now made that swath of land we need for storage. People live upstairs. Put your electricals upstairs. Make sure you don't park cars in undergrounds anymore. So I was on a call yesterday. We have a climate leadership meeting where all the different agencies talk about what they're working on, and there was a presentation from planning, and they were talking about changing some of the parking requirements for new buildings to reduce the number of cars that they're going to require developers provide spaces for, which is a good thing for New York. That's part of one of the big barriers is the way the rules for building development themselves preclude or prohibit some of the things that we're chatting about. So there is a big shift in many different parts of the systems that needs to happen to get to this. But yeah, it's a great idea. And also what I like about it is it doesn't require someone to actively go out and close a gate or do something. It's passive flood protection, which is much more reliable than when you have to have somebody go out and do something, and then the mechanics could fail. And yeah, so we should explore.
Yeah, I like that concept too. And with everything else, like I said in the beginning, understanding and educating become key, because, and I've seen some situations where whether it's not within the building, but creating a football, softball field that absorbs all of that water. But you have to educate people to understand this is why the field is flooded, because it's supposed to. Because if you don't continue that education, then I get hands raised, well, my field is flooded. Well, it's supposed to be. But then people react on that, and then they try to fix the field. And now you have a problem, because now the water's going to find another place to go. So that education definitely becomes key.
Please go on. I was actually just about to open it up to the audience, so you can be the first.
I think a mic is coming your way, though.
So traditionally, we're talking about living with water. Can New York live with water?
Can you hold your mic up a little? I don't know if it's working.
Is this on?
Yes, it is on.
Okay. So the question is how to live with water. And we have cities like Amsterdam that were designed and built to live with water. I'm hearing acronyms like HATS, big U's, sponges, all of these things. So there's a sort of elaborate meta language that's forming around this discourse. And my question is, if we look at engineering marvels and engineering failures, and I'm sorry to bring up Katrina, I know that Sandy's a big deal up here, but what are the precedents that the commissioner, for example, would use to describe these solutions to the status quo? You mentioned the flooding fields, which is a good example, and people try to remediate them on their own. What sort of precedents are you all sharing at the community level to describe these complex systems to people who aren't engineers or architects? I think most of us in the room speak your meta language, though we're still playing catch up on the acronyms. So I'd like to hear more about how you're communicating and what precedents you're using.
I'll start. And it's a valid question, and it's actually one of the questions that is within one of those themes that we talked about with the Harbor and Trib study, making sure that our messaging does get out there to folks that don't speak the language. 3,000 pages that doesn't go over too easily for some folks, which is why we try to complement that with having sessions like these. I mean, we went out to, and I don't know I forget what the numbers were, but many different sessions within the entire New York, New Jersey area to allow for these discussions to happen and be a little bit more candid or open about what it is we're doing without using the jargon, without using the acronyms that we have. And we thought those were pretty successful, but there is an opportunity as we move forward to even increase that moving forward. We had, within many sessions, we had opened it up in a way where we had the sign language being used in it. We had different languages. I think we were up to 6 different languages that we were doing these things. We had our websites that were trying to give the information so you could have it in a snapshot as opposed to trying to get through all of the hurdles on what exactly it means. So we're not exactly there, but we are trying to get there, understanding exactly like you're saying, not everybody gets it. And there are different complexities with this. We have been trying to work with different agencies within the United States, but also outside the United States, whether it is Amsterdam or Venice or Holland, London, but understanding what they've done, what lessons that they've learned, and try to incorporate that into everything that we do.
And I'll just speak from the city's perspective. I think there are a number of different examples that we should be incorporating into our communication with communities. You mentioned Katrina. There's so many lessons learned there. And what I took away from my, different panels that I've gone to hear from Katrina was that the need to not just think about the water, but also the programs and policies that people rely on to get back to life cannot be overlooked. So there's a whole other thing I could go into there, but just making sure that when we're in communities talking about flood risk, we're also cognizant of all the other components that people are giving them, things that could be stressful for people in the moment that may not be, the flooding might not be a priority for them. So how do we make sure we talk to them in a way that's quick and clear and gets to the point so they can get back to the other things that they need to work on, but also we provide spaces where we meet them where they are, and we provide daycare, we provide food, and so we try to take away all the impediments for people to come out to talk to us, because like I said, it may not be their #1 priority today. A couple of weeks after a big storm, it's the #1 priority, but you get away from the storm events and there's other things people need to deal with. So that's one, making sure that we're meeting them where they are. And some examples that I've seen as well that I think are really effective in Tulsa, they were talking about how do they have equity conversations. So it wasn't about flooding, but it was about equity. And they had equity dinners with people, with small groups of 10. And that was just just more intimate, a way for people to actually get their voices heard and for the city officials to listen, right? To hear them in a different way than in a forum where you have panels and people come up and it's very stressful for everybody. So small, intimate, and taking the time. That's a resource. It, it takes a lot of resources to do that, but I think it's effective. And there was another one I was going to tell you, and oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I just totally slipped my mind. But arts. How do we make these conversations different than the check a box? You have to have 2 community meetings, and then you can go about your planning, right? Can we bring in arts and culture, different types of events to talk to people, and have water tables to illustrate what we're talking about? Because you're right, the language is tricky, and I even learning a new language, having come to the U.S. Water, people in my own profession say different words differently than I'm used to, and so I'm also like creating my own glossary. So if it's hard for me, imagine how it's hard for people in the communities, right? So very well aware of that, and I thank you for bringing that up. It's something we need to be constantly reminded about, because you can easily slip back into your professional circles and just keep talking and talking and realize nobody's understanding a thing you've said. Why is no one giving me their feedback, right? It's because they're like, you're talking another language, yeah.
Hi. So a couple of lots and lots of questions. First of all, I'm really surprised 12 years after Sandy that we are not as far along as I think we should be. I think it's a major failure. I am not a fan of the Army Corps of Engineers. I think that they basically have a hammer and they just put concrete everywhere. And we've seen that from dams from 50 years ago to today. We're deaccessioning, we're destroying dams. And I lived in Holland for many years. And the way that, I think that there's a number of failures, and the largest is communication and actually enrolling the community in a larger topic. And that is not something that needs a lot more things than just basically TV spots. I mean, we are a city of 8.5 million people. There are 75 people in the room. You cannot do it at scale, like room by room. That's just not a reasonable way. I am someone who's I'm a leader at the AIA. I'm someone who's deeply connected to our community, and I have heard nothing in 12 years. That's a massive failure. And I feel like, I don't mind jargon. I went to graduate school, I speak, I teach, whatever. Jargon's fine, it's not the problem. The problem is that it's much like when de Blasio ended composting during the pandemic. It is a massive failure of imagination. And people are not, I'm a highly educated, super crazy interested, and I don't know what's going on. And that's not good. So whatever money is being spent by the Army Corps of Engineers building a wall, which I think is a terrible idea for your community and for my community and for all of the city, building walls to deal with rainwater and storm surge isn't ultimately the long-term goal. We are an archipelago I love the urban archipelago comment. All of New York City, all of the entire borough area was once surrounded by wetlands. That is something that should be reintroduced. I don't know how, I'm not an engineer, not my thing, but it seems like there's a number of things. One, the communication is just crappy. It's the nicest way to say it. Walls are great, but we can't depend on them. We need to really think, and I don't know why 12 years later we're still talking about this. I don't know why it's not done, just my own thinking. And so it's just disappointing for me. First of all, why would your agency even be possibly on the line? To me, it's something that should be funded. We should know about it. It should have been funded 12 years ago. Your agency should never have the opportunity to be defunded. And I don't know how to solve all of this, but I feel like we're talking in circles. Like, why Rockaway 12 years later isn't in a better, more secure situation? Again, I don't have all the solutions. I've done projects in the Hamptons. I know that, 20 years ago I had to deal with water in the Hamptons, so it's not like a news flash. We are all in a very precarious area between the edge of New Jersey, Manhattan, and all of Long Island. And I feel like, you know, it's also, it's a bigger topic about architecture as a whole, but we cannot do this community by community. It needs to be a larger scale. We are not educating the public. And you can't do it 10 people at a time. You can't do it 75 people at a time. This should be something that's on every local station. There should be a conversation that people are involved in and interested in. And that should, I don't know if it's a national program or a local program, but it seems like it's our job as a community, as professionals, as agencies, to educate. And we're not doing it.
Yeah, so let me take I think that I heard two things there. One is about the communication, and one is about the speed, right? Is that it? Would I miss it? Okay, those are two I can speak to. Right? Okay, so the first thing I agree with you about the speed, and that is why this bureau was even created. It was a part of the Plan NYC 2023 plan. We need to looking back at where we've come from since Sandy, it's been too slow. How are we going to accelerate now moving forward into the next era? And so it was identified that we need, there was no single point of contact or agency responsible for coastal storm risk management before this bureau was created. So that's my job, is to figure out how do we do better, right? And how do we get the plans that have started, get them finished? So, because plans have a way to stall. Really, you know, and I don't know how many of you have worked in the city government. It is particularly difficult in New York City to be a city employee to get stuff done because it's so big. When I worked for the Resilient Cities Network, I worked with lots of cities. I had 30 cities in North America. What we found was that it's the cities that are kind of medium-sized, big to medium, 500, 400 to 600,000, could actually get a lot done and mobilize because they have resources, but they're not so big that it becomes too difficult to go across siloed. So New York has got that. We've got that challenge. Also, the nature of this work, I don't have to tell you all. I mean, it's not a 4-year political cycle sort of oriented work. It is complicated. The planning itself does take a decade. That's how long it takes, and it's not because it's not for lack of trying to do it faster. It's hard to compress some of these project elements, but that is my sole job, is to figure out how do we do these things better and how do we accelerate. But we have some real constraints that we can't get around. Legislative constraints, environmental reviews take a long time, and we don't want to skip those. So that is, and that's one of the things that we have to just keep talking about why it's taking so long and what we're doing where we can do things to make it faster. On the communication side, I agree with you that we need to scale it, but I also sort of disagree that we can't do it 10 people at a time, because in New York, the communities are all so different that we can't just talk to the city as a whole. We do need to take the time and go in community by community and find out what each community needs and tailor the responses. And what I've learned here too is that, I mean, there are communities that have their own plans. They're amazing. They've spent money, they've hired consultants, they've developed their dreams, and they've put them on paper with technical solutions. And we need to now start looking at them because there's been a disconnect between what the community's been working on for the last 12 years, because they haven't seen anything coming out of the city, and what we are now poised to try to implement. And so we need to think about, well, is the plan, Army Corps has planned a wall. The community doesn't want a wall, but they have another plan. Can we come together and have that conversation? And the answer is yes, because we're in that conceptual phase right now where we can now start to get into more details. But it has to be with the community at the table to tell us what they want to see. What that means, when I was talking about choices before, is it means the choice may be we're not going to have protection for a 100-year storm event. We have chosen to have a lower level of protection, so we will flood a few more times, but the community is now prepared to adapt to that condition, and the trade-off for them is that they get the access that they wanted, or they don't have to raise quite as high, but they understand what the choices were. And that is a community by community conversation. It's like 520 miles of shoreline in New York City, so we can't, there's gonna be different treatments.
So what I mean by communication is just a communication that there's things going on. So I know that there's, I mean, we're a really big city, so I get that. What I mean is that there's a way to have a conversation where people, like Sandy happened, and then it disappeared,
Yeah,
and we're 12 years later.
yeah,
And what I mean by that is there's a way to educate people about our physical environment, and that's the kind of program. Not that, not not the specific solutions. I just mean we're a coastal city that I think for the first, we're 400 years old as of this year. I think for the first 350, we didn't think of ourselves as a coastal community.
I agree, I agree.
And I mean
Yeah.
that kind of like broad education, like a bigger. I'm not worried about the specifics, but I feel like there's just there's just a way to get people thinking as a city.
Yes.
Because in Holland, it's always for the betterment of the community.
Yeah.
And so having that bigger conversation, not hyper-specific, where people, when I'm doing a renovation, people are like, why do I have to take my plumbing back to the original core of the building? Clients yell at me all the time. And I say, because you want to be a good neighbor. Because we're repairing yours, so the guy upstairs does his. So there's a whole notion of what it is to be a good neighbor. And I think that that's just a general conversation. I think we can create around the whole city about what it means to be a resilient city.
I think we have one more question in the back.
Just quickly, I'll add on. So I'll say on the communication piece, it is concerning that you say you don't know anything about what it is that we're doing. So there is a part that we can do better. We are looking to include other agencies, other groups, to help us out with that messaging and get that get that out there a bit more. And even direct people to our website, because there's a lot of information on a web page. We put the whole story map on there, but it's not getting out apparently. So we do need to do better with that. Everything that we do, I'll say though, does cost time and money. And there was a part of what we're doing within this study, and yes, planning takes a little while, but even within this study, there was a part of it where the prior administration said, we're done. And they stopped funding us for a couple of years. So there are parts when we talk about priorities where we are answering the mail to our administration, and some of the start-stops we have struggled with some of that. When I say successes, I think we have shown, and there are specifics on those. The success is not so much as communication, but when we talk about the Hamptons, we've done a pretty good job out there, and people are really satisfied with the work that we've done out there. When we talk about the Rockaways, people are really satisfied with the work that we've done out there. When we talk about Staten Island, yeah, that's another one, sorry. But we are making progress, and when we talk about the inlets that we've dredged, when we talk about the beneficial uses of some of these materials, when we talk about the work that's been done in New Jersey, Seabright, Port Monmouth, there are a lot of work. There's a lot of work that's been done to make these communities resilient. Now, do we put them out there in a way that the public can see them? Probably not so much to tell those stories of what we've done. We know it as an agency, and maybe we do take for granted what we've been doing. But message received. I got it.
More questions?
Can I?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Go on. You have a mic. Go on.
Thank you. First, I just want to say thank you for even coming and listening to all of us. I appreciate that. And so we're all here professionals, and we're all, like you, looking at this water issue almost like an elephant. And we're all seeing different parts of the elephant, and that's the beauty of having so many people looking at the elephant. I think that the comments I personally would love to share with you are that your comments about how we can address each little part of the city, and so those incremental savings can help us overall, and perhaps, if, like you said about all the individual landowners, that even if we collectively find ways to alleviate 5% of the flooding, that's 5% of the budget the city has that can be used for something more helpful. And I think that meeting the owners, whoever the owners are, at their level, and being very creative in opening to letting everything be on the table. Whether you have a single family owner, you have a mom and pop investor in one of the outer boroughs that manages a lot of properties, or you even have a large developer in the city. I think everybody wants to help, but it's very hard to know how to help. And so the idea of these breaking up the city into the micro communities, I think is a great idea. I think in my wish list, I would like to see something almost like 311 or a climate core, where whoever the owner is on those three categories I said, that they can call somebody and get intellectual assistance on what they want to do. It could be something that you want a curb cut to let some of the drainage go onto your sidewalk plot. Great, we can do that, and we will ensure you will not have a violation. Perhaps somebody says, you know what, I don't want my part of my road asphalted, and I don't want to get a violation for not maintaining my part of the asphalt. Keep an open mind for that. Another suggestion is, I work actually as a developer, so I'm very familiar with what you're saying about the water cisterns and stuff, and I actually have done half a dozen projects on Canal Street in the last 10, 15 years. So I'm very, even on the professional level, what to do. And even something open with the intergovernment thinking of maybe we start to have a two-tiered sidewalk system. An average, for example, an average development site in Manhattan may only be 40 feet wide. And I may have to put like 4 different doors going in and out. So that means I may only have a undisturbed stretch of sidewalk that's 8 feet. And I would like to be able to elevate my whole ground floor without having the burden as the owner to do that. Because we're stretched too. In the last 4 years, our mortgages have doubled because developers pay interest-only mortgages, as you know. We want to do the right thing, but we'd like to have the city have an open mind to whatever each individual comes up with. And then just lastly, your point about the cisterns, you probably already know this, but we are required to put cisterns on our projects. Anytime you build a new roof, whether it's a new building or a new addition, you're required. It used to be 20 years ago, we would have to have a cistern in the basement. Then as technology, roof paving technology improved, we were allowed to choose to put it on the roof. And now in the last about 3 years, we now are required to do both. We have to be planned to store water on the roof for so many inches, in addition to having a green roof. And we also have to have a cistern, which impacts us again financially. So I just ask you can have an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? Okay, yes. There's been a question here for a while. Can we get the mic over here? Thank you.
I think it's just about communication. Some of you I know, and
Can you wait for the mic? Sorry.
It's in line with an earlier question about communication, and you're talking about communication, community to community. One of the things, so I represent Community Board 1. We started an Environmental Protection Committee, which I chair now, which is overlooking the Lower Manhattan Resiliency Planning. We've been doing this now for 10 years. And one of the things that strikes me as really critical is not, yes, of course, community to community, of course, and we get presentations, we beg for them, we try very hard to follow them all. One of the things that we've asked for and that our congressman has asked for and many people ask for is a kind of holistic understanding, and I know this new position is hopefully going to help with that. But it is critical that federal, city, and state get together in a way that is really apparent and transparent to the public generally as to how decisions are made and how we can all work together. We give lip service to this idea, but we don't really see it in action. And for example, I will give you the example that the Battery Park City Authority is now very full on in planning, as you know. And this then comes into the city crossing West Street, a state position. The federal plans have showing, going up the Hudson River Park, what you may or may not do. And then this, of course, the city tying into North Moore Street. It's a perfect example of the absolutely essential need to clarify and work together what it is that really can and should be done there. And without all the hands on deck in a very coherent way, with the public invited into that room, it isn't really a highly functioning potential plan. And so I leave it to you and I ask you, is there something that can be done that can allow for that conversation, federal, city, and state, all coming together in this planning that's just more transparent, more coherent, and more holistic?
So I'll start. But one of the things that we try to do, one of the things I'll say that actually we've seen as successful is when the community boards reach out to us and ask us to come to a meeting, because they've set it up in a way that, Rockaway has been the fantastic example where we've got community boards that ask us to come out to the meeting. They'll set up the meeting and they'll have hundreds of people attend these meetings. So that part of the work is kind of done for us. And then we'll come out and with the city, with the state, have that combined front to say, okay, this is what it is we're doing, this is how we're connected, and then allowing for that engagement. So if that does happen, I think that's one of the things that really has shown some success. And we'll come out, we'll try to come out wherever we can, whenever we're asked.
If I could throw in another request, like continuing the cliff pylon. I think that's awesome, and that's where a lot of the work starts. But as you know, a lot of the folks who are either involved in their community boards or will come to those meetings are very high engaged folks who have like the time and energy and flexibility to come into some of those spaces, and some of the regular meetings that the Army Corps holds on projects in the Rockaways are attended by those folks and happen during the day when a lot of other folks may be working. I know I'm a New Yorker. A lot of New Yorkers like to harp on the MTA and throw them under the bus. It's something we do for fun. A thing that I think the MTA has done relatively well in some of its large long-term capital projects, like elevator and ADA accessibility upgrades, or East Side Access and projects like that, is putting a very legible timeline on their website, where I, as a guy who lives in Jamaica, Queens, can go and find out when is East Side Access happening. Gosh, it got delayed 2 years, fine. But at least it's visible to me. And you have mentioned some of the story maps, but I haven't seen as much of that. And I think having resources like that for the coastal storm risk management projects in Arvin and Edgemere and Hamels, that would make a huge difference.
Let me answer that one, because I want to tie these two things together. No elected officials or OMB people in the room, right? Okay. So one of the things that I have, so I told you I'm standing up the bureau. And we want to make sure we're spending we're putting as much resources toward community engagement and helping people understand their threats as we are to building infrastructure. So I've proposed that we have a team that is the community-facing team, one team for each borough, that can be in the communities talking about exactly what's going on and where we're at. So it's a constant. It's not just at these milestones of the project, but it's constant. And it's not just about the U.S. Army Corps projects, but it's about all of the projects that are happening on the coast. There's parks projects, there are community projects, there are DOT projects. So there's a lot happening. And the reason I was is anybody here? Because I need that budget. I need the electeds to kind of say, yeah, that's important. Because I'm hearing it's important. And so wish me luck. I'm not even going to get that budget until the next fiscal year, because we weren't able to go forward for this fiscal year. So that's a challenge that we have. It's real. But I think what your solution that you're proposing is one we should do. And you're right. You should be able to go and and very quickly see what's going on in my neighborhood. I see some really cool tools coming out now from the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. They've just released some new vulnerability indexes, and they have some really cool tools that we can piggyback on. And so it's not like we have to start from scratch. We just need to put the information up there for people. And to your point about the coordination, you're correct. We meet every Thursday, the two states, New Jersey, New York, the city, and the Army Corps, to talk about the HAT study in particular. I'm meeting with Battery Park City Authority this afternoon, and so those conversations are happening. But again, you're not hearing about it, but it's been a little bit too abstract until now, but now we're actually getting into details, and now we have this bureau, so you know where to go. So I will say, if you have specific questions, call this bureau. It's just me right now. Right? Call your elected officials to get us the funding we need to be able to expand this. But we hear you. I think it's really important. And when I was talking earlier about the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, this is a really, really critical 5 to 6 year period for us in planning, where things are being shaped, decisions are being made. We need everybody's voices to be. We want to come out at the end of this process with something that's built that people they like it. Not everyone's going to like it, but we want people to feel that they were heard in the process and that we got closer to what everybody needs. Otherwise, what's the point of doing this work, right? That's why we're here. So whatever suggestions you have, let me know. I'll compile them. I'll keep pushing for this funding to build the teams and to build the communication pieces. But I mean, that is where we are today. We're working on it.
I mean, the expression of urgency that came up earlier, I would couple with the communication and the timing issue, and I would just make 2 very quick observations. The first is, we're not a coastal city. We are an archipelago, and that heightens the pressure. And there are other archipelago cities. I mean, I was just with the mayor of Miami-Dade 2 days ago, and they're technically not an archipelago, but how you use that framing as a branding device to express urgency suggests it's coming at you from every direction, not just from the coast, which I think is a poor qualifier for what we're seeing unleashed upon us on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis. And I think, having spent time again in Singapore, it's not on the websites, it's not even on TV, it's all over the MTA, it's all over the buses. We live in an archipelago, or, there's what is HATS? It's trying to trigger, I don't know what the branding campaigns are, and it needs a budget line. But if we're
saying it can't be engineers to do this?
No, it can't be. No, but getting it into the public sphere, I think beyond screens and into the environment is important. And one example of that I've seen is in Carl Schurz Park. There's a very small sign, but if you look for it, you can find it, that says the East River is not a river. It's a tidal strait. Most people in New York don't even know we live in an archipelago. If you ask them, most of them think we live on land. I mean, the Bronx does, but the rest of the city doesn't. Or that, Red Hook's in Long Island, and that Long Island's the 17th most populous island on the planet. These are things that I think could be leveraged to heighten awareness about urgency and nudge people into getting involved, that is well beyond your station, but it's a bigger kind of branding effort that I think could be incredibly beneficial. I mean, the RPA does great work on this. It's on your website. It's well packaged and put together, and it's in PDFs, but how many of us, outside of us, are going to your website to see your comments on the HAT study or your recent report on adaptation nationally, and so the content's there. I think it's just how do we come up with a better conveyance system to get it out, because that is likely to result in more individual and diversified community participation.
Yeah, and I I hear the challenge, and we'll try to take that back. I don't know how best to get that information out, but it could be, because one thing is the broader aspect of something like HATS, the big study, but the specifics and getting to what we're doing in areas like the Rockaways could definitely help people understand that. And I just wanted to also, because you mentioned MTA, I mean, it's yet another thing that that is being done, but it's not necessarily transparent. I thought it was an awesome thing. So if you look around at the subways, so we've been battled with the floodwaters coming down the subways, but if you look at the subways around New York City, a lot of them are developing additional stairways that are coming up to prevent a lot of that water from going down. Now, people look at that, and if you don't understand what it is that they're doing, people, why are they're making my transportation harder? But so I gotta go up to come down. But it's all a matter of living with water and trying to design it in a way to reduce that threat.
I think we really need to celebrate our wins. And so your job as whoever's in charge of the agencies is talking about the wins. And if you just stick it on the side of a bus, which makes the most sense, stick on the side of a bus or inside the subway, celebrating our wins and people being excited about it, people getting engaged, I think gives you, your agencies more power. And also, we want to make sure that your agencies are
Maybe let you hate us a little less.
All right, one last question. Who's it going to be? I think at the back. Oh.
Thank you. This is a question about how to achieve synergies in the extraordinarily high level of work that needs to be done to adapt to climate disruption and at the same time mitigate. And I'm thinking of Local Law 97, and you see no end of companies that are set up to help building owners comply with Local Law 97. Now, there's probably limited overlap between what you need to do to comply with Local Law 97 and what you need to safeguard your building or store water on site or do other wise things. But there's got to be some overlap. So I'm just sort of encouraging and asking, are there efforts to synergize between Local Law 97 compliance and keeping people safe in their homes?
Oh, that is a fantastic question. Off the top of my head, I can't say yes, but I can tell you that, so Local Law 97 is administered through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, and there's an accelerator program that is set up to support residents to access services and funding to become in compliance with Local Law 97. That agency is led by the climate, chief of climate, what is his name? Chief Climate Officer, Rit Agarwala, who is also the commissioner of the DEP. And so if there's ever going to be a time where we could explore that, it is now, because Rit is really overseeing both of those functions. I think taking a model in a slightly different area and applying it to our challenges in water is a perfect thing to do. But what you're describing is having an existing system already set up that we could tap into. I think that's something we should explore. I like it. I'll take it back.
Thank you. I think we have to wrap up, I'm afraid. I'll let my colleague wrap up, but thank you so much for being here, and thank you for showing up and talking about this beast of a city that is New York.
Yes, first of all,
First of all, thank you to the panelists for this very thought-provoking discussion. And I want to especially thank Rob for bringing it to Donna and me. Oh, I'm Gretchen Bank, the other co-chair of the committee. But so Rob brought this to us and assembled the panel, so fantastic. And I also want to alert you to some upcoming events. We have June 6th, we're assembling a panel discussion about the New York Panel on Climate Change report, which is soon to be released. On July 11th, Donna has organized a tour at the Asia Society of an international exhibit on climate change called Coal and Ice. It's limited attendance, so look for that on our website. And September 26th, during Climate Week, we have an event, Nature-Based Industrial Revolution, which is the brainchild of Sandra here, through many discussions with Donna and myself, and will coincide with the release of your book, correct, Habitat. So that's during Climate Week. And our website is on the AIANY New York website, Design for Risk and Reconstruction. We have many videos of past events and lots of other content there, so you can familiarize yourselves with that if you're not already. So thank you, everybody.